Welcome everyone to the fourth workshop in the 2022 New York State World Languages Professional Learning Series. My name is Candace Black and I'm your World Language Associate in the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages of the New York State Education Department. Today's workshop is entitled Understanding Standards-Based Lesson Planning. Developing a logical sequence of engaging lessons is the key to realizing the objectives of thematic unit plans that facilitate learner success and growth in proficiency. In this session, participants will explore ways to envision, design, and implement a variety of lesson plan types. Each integrates the standards in natural and meaningful ways that will engage learners and promote proficiency development. Let's review a few housekeeping details before we get started. We have more than 800 pre-registered attendees today, so we ask that you remain muted and that you reserve use of the chat for questions for the presenters or for when the presenters specifically instruct participants to use this feature. If you accidentally get disconnected, just reconnect or call me and I will assist you. My cell phone is on the confirmation email I sent you this week. I'm sure that by now Bill Heller has entered in the Google link for the handouts folder for this event, and we will continue to put this link into the chat so that you have it. In this Google folder, you will find various templates and handouts that will be helpful in the processing of the information for this workshop. Please keep in mind that the PDF of the presentation will be added, although it is not in there yet. Our tradition is that we put that in the folder at the end of the workshop. You will also receive a confirmation email from me along with your certificate of your certificate of attendance or CTLE certificate, and we'll include the link to the handouts folder with that as well. Within about 24 hours of this event is when you'll get that email. Those who attend this workshop in full will receive either a certificate of attendance or a certificate documenting CTLE credit. The type of certificate you will be receiving was indicated in the confirmation email you received after you registered. As you heard, this workshop is being recorded. The video will be uploaded to the World Languages Professional Learning website within about a week of this event. Those who are unable to attend this live webinar will be able to earn CTLE credit by viewing the video and answering 7 out of 10 questions on a post-assessment correctly. Before I introduce our presenters, I'd like to thank the following individuals for their help in assisting with this workshop: Alicia Barinas, Kimberly Harder, Luisa Mota, Barbara Patterson, Eris Thompson, and Yunxiao Zhang. Our workshop presenters today are Dr. Joanne O'Toole, Bill Heller, and Dr. Lori Langer de Ramirez. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to invite Joanne, Bill, and Lori to begin this workshop.
Thank you everyone for being here today. And we look forward to engaging you with lots of wonderful ideas about lesson planning with the revised New York State World Language Standards. So as we get started, I want to remind you that this is part of a larger series. And there's one more webinar in our 2021-22 Professional Learning Series, and that will be on May 19th from 4 to 5 p.m., specifically around the topic of understanding standards-based curriculum planning, kind of the culminating session for all of the sessions that we've been offering over the last year and a half. So please put that on your calendar and make sure you're registered right through the NYSED OBEWL website. In addition to our online webinars, we're finally going to be able to see people in person. So this summer in your region, we will be coming at 2 different times for what are called Summer Collaborative Unit Design Program. So you can take note of your region and the 2 dates and the locations of those sessions. You'll notice New York City has a different location for each of its 2 sessions. Just like our recorded webinars, CTLE credits will be available for your participation in these events. Again, you can register for them on the NYSED OBEWL website. I also remind you about the Wakelet. It is a curation site where we have been collecting authentic resource collections and resources to support you in implementing the use of authentic resources in your unit and lesson planning. So please visit it. It's also linked from the NYSED OBEWL website. So as we get started, I just want to remind everyone what's been said, but I know some of you just came on, that the slides from today will be in the handouts folder after today's session. That link to the handouts folder will be placed in the chat multiple times during today's session and will arrive in your email inbox tomorrow. So today's focus, again, understanding standards-based lesson planning. And our webinar symbol key, we have that muted microphone there to remind you to please stay muted throughout the entire session. I actually don't think we're using this next symbol today, which is asking you to think alone, but please think throughout our session. Right in the chat box, we know you're going to have questions, but I will ask that you only write in the chat box at the point in the webinar when we put up this symbol, which today will actually be only at the end. Because when people are putting things in the chat during the session, that will pop up on the screen and perhaps interfere with some people's ability to see what's on the screen and to engage with the ideas that we're presenting. So thank you for that. And then there's different content that we'll be sharing with you that is in that Google folder that we have linked. So let's get going. We have 4 goals for today's webinar. First, I can identify how world language lesson planning is guided by elements of the world language unit plan. I can identify contents of the New York State World Language Lesson Plan template, and I can identify guiding principles, strategies, and scaffolds that support student learning. Finally, I can analyze lesson plans at 3 proficiency checkpoints for how they prepare learners to carry out the revised New York State World Language Learning Standards. So I want to make sure that we start by situating lesson plans. Those of you who've attended multiple of sessions that we've offered have seen this, a variation of this slide before. So at the top you see checkpoint curriculum, checkpoint A, checkpoint B, checkpoint C. Typically, each checkpoint has 2, perhaps more courses. And there is a curriculum for each of those courses that is composed of a set of unit plans. I'm showing here 4 per course. Clearly, you could have more than that, but I'm just doing that as the opportunity to point out the fact that we have 4 overarching themes. So you would imagine that at least 4 different, all 4 themes are addressed across the units that are associated with a given curriculum. And then we have multiple topics, and it's not the intention that you design 1 unit per topic, but rather our units are thematic in nature, and that you draw on topics from different themes and integrate them. So where are our lesson plans? Well, we integrate those topics and we address the goals of the thematic unit plans through a sequence of lesson plans. So how do we move from unit planning, as we discussed in our October and November webinars, to lesson planning using backward design? We're going to revisit a framework that we looked at back in October that's built on high leverage teaching practices or research-based practices that were published in the Glisson and Donato High Leverage Teaching Practice book in 2021. High leverage teaching practice number 7 is establishing a meaningful and purposeful context for language learning, and that is done at the unit level. High leverage teaching practice number 8, planning for instruction using an iterative process of backward design, shows up in both unit and lesson planning, as we can see in this visual framework. The inquiry question, establishing the context, identifying desired outcomes, and determining acceptable evidence, we did at the unit level. It's when we get to this step 4, planning learning experiences, that we're honing in on how do we move forward in writing our lesson plans. And as always, we self-assess and reflect every time we teach. So to start planning learning experiences, you need to ask yourself, what sequence of teaching and learning experiences will enable students to demonstrate those desired outcomes, the outcomes that you identified in your unit planning. And I just really want to focus on that word sequence, because lesson planning is all about sequencing. So the lesson plan itself, we're going to define as a carefully sequenced, there's that word again, set of tasks that are designed to allow learners to reach the targeted learning objectives of the lesson. And we have developed a lesson plan template for you to use. These, if they're not already posted on the State Ed OBEWL website, they will be, and they will be in your folder. And because we know that we have different categories of language, there are 3 variations of it. There's one that is for category 1-2 languages: Spanish, French, Italian, German. These are the languages that have Roman alphabets. We have a second version of the lesson plan template for category 3-4 languages. These are our indigenous languages. These are languages that don't use the Roman alphabet. And then we have a third version for classical languages. So make sure when you download the template, you download the one for your language. And if you download it as a Word document, it has some drop-down interactive features available to really help you efficiently write your lesson plans. So what are some of the things we want to think about when we think about a lesson planning template? First of all, it is a tool for organizing your thinking. It reminds you that there are certain things that you want to have in your mind as you're going through that lesson plan, and that you want to be able to illustrate to others, especially when perhaps you have others who are taking a look at your teaching and your lesson plan designing, or maybe you're even modeling for pre-service teachers or colleagues that you're mentoring. It is a rehearsal for the actual lesson. It's that opportunity to get all of your thinking out, so when you go to teach the lesson, you will have thought everything through, thinking about what might you be doing, what the students are doing, where they might have some questions or some difficulties, where you might plan to pivot, and so on. And a single lesson plan is not something that can stand on its own. It's part of a sequenced set of plans for meeting unit goals. And you might have multiple sequences within a given unit as well. So how we're going to, or I'm going to proceed, is I'm going to take you to the unit plan template and then the lesson plan template, kind of piece by piece. First with blank templates, because I want to show you what portions of the unit plan template translate and transfer onto the lesson plan template. And then after I do that from the blank templates, I'm going to be using exemplars that I've created of an exemplar unit plan and an exemplar lesson plan. Again, all of these will be found in the folder. So let's start by looking at the unit plan context. So, excuse me, and the lesson plan context. So first, in the lesson plan context, you'll see that there's a place for the meaningful unit title, which you took directly from the unit plan template. Secondly, on the lesson plan, you will see a place for the inquiry question, and above, the inquiry question is taken directly from the unit plan context. Third, you'll identify the proficiency checkpoint and proficiency target, taken right from the unit plan. Fourth, the language in course that were also documented on the unit plan. So you can see 1 through 4 are identical. When we get to number 5 on the lesson plan context, you'll see it says lesson focus. The lesson focus is just a bite-sized piece. Remember, it's one lesson in a sequence of many lessons that comes out of the unit plan context, where you've identified the anchor theme, the anchor topic, those integrated topics, and your unit plan overview. So you're going to just extract a piece that will go into your lesson plan. So here's my example. I'll be showing you a unit that I designed for checkpoint B, remembering that that is primarily 9th and 10th grade in a traditional 712 program, that I entitle Being a Hero, Ser Héroe. And I want you to notice, actually I want to point something out. See my little hero guy? Every time you see him, we're looking at the unit plan. So you'll see in the section called Brief Unit Overview. So before I get to the lesson plan I show you, I will have worked with my students on this unit, which is about heroes, where students are learning how to ask and answer questions about their personal role models and to be able to describe role models' qualities and impact. So that's what precedes where we're going with this given lesson. Where this lesson is situated is in the next part of my 3-part unit, where I'm going to have students interpret news stories of the actions of everyday people and justify what makes these people's actions heroic and why, and having students describe these everyday heroes' qualities. And over to the side, you see photographs of 2 of the everyday heroes from that we'll be studying about. The first one being the Biblioburro, and the second one being Pura Belpre. Now, the lesson plan that I'm showing you won't include Pura Belpre, but she would be the next person that we would be looking at after El Biblioburro. So that was where I was in the unit plan. So now we see my lesson plan in that context, where all I have written in under lesson focus is everyday hero, El Biblioburro. So that's how I take that bite-sized piece from the unit plan and I identify it as my lesson focus. Back to the blank templates. Here you see the unit plan can-do statements and acceptable evidence. And down below, the lesson can-do statements and acceptable evidence. And so what I'm doing here, I'll take a click, Bill, is that the standards as they're presented in the unit plan are just written by title. In the lesson plan, I've included the wording and checkboxes. So the wording will help you remember very precisely what each one of the standards tells you that students will be learning, and they'll help inform your writing of the very precise can-do statements for the lesson. And there's a place where you can check off the standards, not every single standard that will be hit in the lesson, but the ones that will be assessed, because in reality, it's very typical that we in some ways address all of the standards, but we don't assess all of the standards. And we want to make sure our focus is on the assessment portion. That's what we'll write our can-do statements in relation to, and that's what we will write our acceptable evidence in relation to. And so then we just transfer from that unit level can-do statement. We write a smaller grain, narrower version for the lesson can-do statement. And then that acceptable evidence, again, it's big and broad in the unit, and we make it nice and narrow. And really, what can be accomplished in one day, in one lesson, when we get to the lesson level can-do statements and acceptable evidence. So again, here's that unit example. And where I'm going to focus is in my lesson that I'll be showing you is interpretive communication. You can see I've written, I can identify what qualities and actions make someone a hero by answering questions based on authentic videos, news stories, biographical texts and poems, and social media. Clearly, that's way too much for a lesson, but that's perfect for big and broad for a unit. I'll also be looking at presentational communication. I can justify with reasons what makes someone an everyday hero. Big and broad can-do statement by writing a nomination letter for an Everyday Hero Award. Now that's really going to be a summative task. So you'll see in the lesson I share with you the piece of that we're working on that moves students towards being able to complete that summative task. And finally, integrated with the interpretive mode will be my culture standard. I can identify qualities and actions of target culture heroes by answering questions based on biographical texts and poems. So we'll be looking at a biographical text, and we will be looking specifically at the actions of an everyday hero. So here, my can-do statements and acceptable evidence at the lesson level. Presentationally, standard 3, I can justify with reasons why someone is an everyday hero by completing 2 columns in a 3-column chart and by creating multi-clause sentences with a sentence frame. I think that because, and I can identify reasons why el Biblioburro, so notice how much more specific this is an everyday hero by completing chart entries for el Biblioburro based on the video, and I name the particular video. So in terms of unit resources and materials, this is pretty much a one-to-one where I'm going to take directly from my unit level list and choose what I'm going to use in that specific lesson. Just one or more of these. And so you can see a big list here that I put into my unit plan. And the specific ones I'm going to pull into my lesson plan. And you can see them listed here. So that's kind of all of the pre-work. Then we get to the instructional sequence. The instructional sequence is really the set of teaching and learning moves, the interactions between teacher and student that are moving the students toward achieving the can-do statements or the learning objectives. So we need to ask ourselves, what will I be doing as the teacher? And simultaneously envisioning what the students will be doing. So as we plan, we want to think about both of those. And lessons very typically have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so that's what we'll be looking at. Another element of the template is attention to diverse learning needs. So as we think about what the teacher will be doing, providing support for students in general and for learners with identified needs, and assuring that they have what they need to be able to perform in that instructional sequence. So here are a list of some potential supports, differentiation strategies you might integrate with input. Think about things like previewing, pre-reading, pre-listening, having students anticipate the vocabulary they'll need based on what it is that they'll be asked to do, what they'll be studying, making clear the purpose of the learning, offering guiding questions, chunking, pausing, having multiple passes with videos and texts, providing visuals or multiple modalities that allow them to learn in more than one way, having them predict or using other kinds of comprehension strategies, planning for monitoring tools like a post-it note or symbols or highlighting or even tiering the text so that there are multiple texts that are appropriate for students' proficiency levels when there are a range of proficiency levels in a given class, and more. These are just a few ideas. And then for output, things that students will really benefit from as they are producing language: models, examples, sentence frames, sentence starters, graphic organizers, word banks, word walls, checklists, rehearsal. Rehearsal is so critical. Emphasize, I put an exclamation point after that one. Peer support, anchor charts, reference lists, or tiering the task. Some students might have a word bank while others do not. Think about how there can be variations of the same task for learners with a range of learning needs. And again, these are just some of the possibilities. So in my lesson on the Everyday Hero, El Biblioburro, I'm planning to model, have a 3-column chart, a form of graphic organizer, having a vocabulary reference list, a sentence frame, photographs, the comprehension strategy of prediction, and multiple passes through the video that my students will watch. And then, of course, the modifications and adaptations will be based on learners' IEPs and 504 plans. So again, we break down the instructional sequence with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so what goes in the beginning of a lesson? Well, the beginning is the time to have students transition from the language they're speaking out in the hallway and in their other classes to speaking the target language. It's the place to enact that classroom routine that most of you are already using and to share the can-do statements. Because when students know what it is that they're supposed to be learning, it improves their focus and their motivation. It's a time to activate prior knowledge and connect prior learning to new learning. It's a time to pique students' interest, really get them hooked and motivated for what's to come, and to carry out those pre-tasks, what's going to build their capacity as they move into engaging with the text, the pre-reading, the previewing, the pre-listening. So this is very small. I apologize, but you will have access to this. So this is the beginning of my lesson on the Biblioburro. And I start by drawing my students' attention to the can-do statements. I share the term everyday hero. This lesson was written with that term in Spanish, but it's translated for you, and ask students to identify examples of people they think might be everyday heroes. And then I share a profession's vocabulary reference sheet in which they can choose by circling, underlining, starring, checking off um, professions that they think represent people who could be everyday heroes, and thinking about what actions those people take that might be heroic or positive deeds, and giving them a 3-column chart, but they're only filling out the first 2, where they're putting 3 to 5 of those professions in that first column with actions in the second column. And because these are intermediate level students and I want to build their proficiency, we're going to be working on multi-clause sentences. I think that a whatever profession is an everyday hero because they do a certain thing. So we're going to go from this chart, a scaffold, to a model, a sentence frame, and a model, such as I think a firefighter hero because they take risks for others is a way to really build out that multi-clause sentence. And so I have them do that. They share it out with a partner. And then um, when sharing with a partner, they identify what they have in common on their lists, other ones that they may have added, agreeing, disagreeing. Again, real world communication. So we get to the middle of the lesson. And this is where we want to think even further about our learning tasks. And you can see in the beginning of my particular lesson, I had quite a few learning tasks. But we want to make sure that the learning tasks are contextualized and purposeful, that they use a language function. So for example, I had the context of everyday hero and the purposefulness of determining who is an everyday hero and why, and using the language function of justify, because they're justifying whether that person is a hero and with reasons, which means that I'm building them up that proficiency ladder. That it's meaningful to students because they got to choose who they put on that list, and they're logically sequenced from input to output. So it began with their input and it went from the profession's vocabulary list input to their output on that chart, to their output in the sentence. And then we're going to do that cycle again in the middle. They're scaffolded, and hopefully you saw that scaffolding, and alternating whole group, small group, pair. So I had a little bit of whole group, I had a little bit of small group, and you'll see that again as we move into the middle of the lesson, and promote success toward learning targets. So one of the important scaffolds to consider is the gradual release of responsibility model that was coined and designed by Pearson and Gallagher back in 1983. And I suspect you know this and know this well. The I do, we do, you do it together, you do it alone. So let's take just one more look at it. I do is your modeling of the task as a teacher. You may do that individually, but you may be doing it with students, or I love to do it with paraprofessionals who may be in the room as well. We do is the opportunity for students to build skill and confidence by doing that task together with the teacher's support. The you do it together is when the learners have peer support, whether it's with a partner, whether it's with a small group. And the you do it together phase might happen multiple times. It might happen with a partner. It might happen again with a small group. It might happen with more scaffolding. It might happen with less scaffolding. And the you do it alone. I would propose that it's not always alone, because in our field, think about things like interpersonal communication. It needs at least 2 people. So we can't ask students to do something like that alone. I want you to instead think about this as students are being individually accountable. So let's move to the next. Oh, sorry, Bill, I forgot the thing at the bottom. Yes. And so as a teacher, you are engaged in those ongoing comprehension checks at every one of the phases after you have modeled, because that's the way you will know, have they achieved the degree of progress towards the learning objectives that you hope and expect for them to have achieved? Or do you need to take a step back? Do you need to add more scaffolding? Do you need to do more instruction? Do you need to offer more support? So here's the middle of my lesson about the Biblioburro. I'm going to show my students a photograph of El Biblioburro and then give them time to make observations, asking them to form and write a prediction about his profession and his actions that would be visible in the photo that might make him an everyday hero. So the students are going to observe the photograph carefully. They're going to write that prediction. And then we're going to come back to having the students share those predictions with a partner and then with a class. So a little think, pair, share. Then I will have them view a video news report out of Colombia, Iniciativa Biblioburro en Colombia, twice. The first time with the sound off. So again, continuing to use those visual cues and the whole time looking at their prediction and making any adjustments, any additions, any changes, or perhaps confirming it. And then I'll have them listen to it with the sound. A second time, continuing to work with their prediction. And then we will come back as a class where the students are comparing the predictions they made with their new understandings. And we'll have a whole class discussion about that, going back to the predictions we had previously shared and their new understandings. So then we get to the end of the lesson. Oh, sorry, no, we don't. Very shortly. I forgot about this slide. One of the things that's important to keep in mind is that there is research about what's called peak learning times. And what this refers to, and it's also referred to the primacy recency effect, the research of Sousa that was published in 2006, that indicates that there are prime or peak times for student learning. The beginning of the class, as you can see through the graphic, is the time when what is learned is best remembered. And the end of the class, what is learned is the next best thing remembered. And that middle has a dip, a bit of a downtime. And they refer to learning episodes, that a lesson has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Oh, wait a minute, you saw that in our instructional sequence, right? And so these learning episodes that have beginning, middles, and end can be an entire lesson. So that sequence can have a beginning, middle, end. But you can also have multiple learning episodes, beginnings, middles, and end inside of a lesson. So for example, think about the middle of a lesson, which is the middle of a larger instructional sequence, but I also had viewing a photograph and making a prediction, watching the video and confirming that prediction, and then coming back and or changing that prediction, and then coming back and looking at that prediction again. That was actually, even though it was the middle of the lesson, it also had a beginning and a middle and an end. So by designing multiple learning episodes inside of a lesson, you can really increase the opportunity for peak learning time. If you teach in a block, it is particularly important that you think about learning episodes. So now we get to the conclusion of the lesson. And as Glisson and Donato propose, close the lesson by checking for what was learned, what was remembered, or what was problematic. And one of the strategies that's particularly powerful for that is to return to the can-do statements, having students identify what they can do of the can-do statements independently, what they can do with support, what they can't do yet, and maybe still need more help with. So we can look at the end of my lesson where I conclude, and it's very short, with an exit ticket that has two parts. And I go back to that sentence frame, I think that, but this time I've put in El Biblioburro. He's an everyday hero because, and then have them take the evidence from having watched the video and complete the sentence in that way. It's taking them back to what they learned earlier and consolidating what they learned from the video and having them put in multiple reasons based on what they heard from different people, all actions of this everyday hero. And then the exit ticket part 2 is that self-assessment on the can-do statements, indicating their degree of confidence. So what if I have to use a textbook for daily lessons? So going back to that unit plan, Bill, I'll have you click. Make sure that you've selected the contents from your textbook chapters that contribute to a purposeful and contextualized thematic unit. And enhance those contents with authentic resources and standards-based tasks like what we were just looking at. And then modify the textbook tasks to create purposefulness and to align with learning standards. So let's look at an example. So this is an example that comes right out of Glisson and Donato's book on high leverage teaching practices. And they say, imagine that you're using a textbook that has the exercise. Use the correct imperative forms in the context of completing a recipe from the target language culture. You can see that they have a task that's contextualized, and it's contextualized culturally, but the purposefulness is not so evident. So here are some things you could potentially consider having students do that are purposeful and connected to language functions. For example, students express opinions about whether or not they believe the dish is appealing individually and through a poll. And then students compare the recipe to a recipe they know. Or partners exchange information through an information gap activity where each has some of the ingredients. Or perhaps students identify the quantity of ingredients needed to serve more people using metric measurements. Or maybe, and I say or, but maybe it's and. Students list the groceries needed for purchasing the recipe ingredients, especially in light of additional guests coming for dinner. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Lori, who will give you an example, not in such detail, but at checkpoint A with your novice learners. Lori?
Thank you, Joanne. So many great ideas, and hopefully we'll see some of them resurface in this lesson, which comes from a broader unit. As Joanne said, no lesson stands alone. It is part of a broader context, a broader thematic unit. And this thematic unit is about the Guinea Pig Festival in Peru. That is the overarching theme, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means in a moment. But I wanted to give you a sense for what happens prior to the lesson that I'm going to highlight today. So the question I ask my students is, what does the queen have in her suitcase? By the way, I am the queen. My students call me La Reina. I don't know why. It might be because I asked them to. That is what they call me. And so I'm telling them that we're going to take a trip. I've already packed my suitcase. And so I will ask students to predict what I have in this suitcase for this trip. And so by predicting, I'm asking them to draw very simple stick figures, quick outline drawings of 3 items of clothing that they think that I have in this suitcase. And so what I'll do is I will start to unpack my suitcase slowly, bit by bit, by clicking through and talking to them about all the things that I have in this suitcase. And I will shower them with lots of language here. This is what we were talking about in a previous webinar called an input flood. So I'm talking lots all about this different clothing. I have a skirt. The skirt is elegant. It's red and purple. My socks are green. Aren't they beautiful? So I'll go on and talk to them. And as students see the different items come out of the suitcase, they of course will circle ones that they have predicted, and hopefully they will have some good guesses. So this is that modeling phase that Joanne was talking about. Students are predicting what is in the suitcase. I'm getting the clothing vocabulary out there to them in a context that is authentic. And then students will decide who got all of them right or wrong. This is a scaffolding task, and I'm using lots of parent ease, which is that showering of language over the students, not just hearing the words for this vocabulary over and over again, but hearing lots of descriptions and tying in those colors again. So this is prior to the lesson. Oh, there's my hat and my coat. You have to have that as well. And then you might recognize this, these materials. This is something I use, as I said, anytime I do a fantasy trip. And so for homework, students will consult this infographic from despegar.com, which is a outfit from South America that does travel. I will tell them we're traveling to Peru in the month of October. They'll have to figure out what the weather looks like at that time. And they're going to pack their suitcase just like I did. So they had the initial look at my suitcase. Now they're going to, for homework, pack their own suitcase in preparation for this trip. So that's the prior to the lesson I'm going to share with you. Now let's get to the lesson itself. In this lesson, I'm focusing on standards 1 and 4. Students will be looking at some authentic resources in the form of some ads. They're also going to be looking at a video. They're going to answer questions about the Guinea Pig Festival. This will lead them to a presentational task in which they are going to describe items of clothing on their own guinea pig. I'll talk about that in a second. So we start this lesson with a magic box task, or in this case, a magic suitcase task. And so I will be asking students to pull different items out of the suitcase. And of course, these are items of clothing. I'm going to use a questioning sequence. This is part of the Terrell's natural approach, and you'll see that it's a scaffolded questioning sequence where I start with questions. I ask students first to point to the article of clothing. We move on to who questions. I'll give out the articles of clothing to different students, and I'll say, who has the blue shirt? Who has the yellow dress? All of that to repeat the vocab. Then there are yes or no questions. So does Max have the t-shirt? Moving on to either or questions. Does Max have the t-shirt or the shoes? And then at the very end, laying in that what question where students will fill in the word that is missing. So what does Max have? In this case, the t-shirt. So this is the teacher action side of the instructional sequence. As Joanne suggested, it is really important and super helpful to be thinking about what the students are doing. So let's have a look at the same task from the student point of view. The students are, of course, pointing to the t-shirt when I ask them to do so. The students are answering the who question with the student's name. Who has the t-shirt? The answer might be Max. They're answering yes or no questions. So students will answer with a sí or no. Either or questions, student will answer with t-shirt. If is this the t-shirt or the dress? They'll answer with t-shirt. And then of course the what question, student answers with t-shirt. So again, having that instructional sequence, the student actions really focuses you on figuring out what is it that students are expected to do with this task. Then we move on to an interpersonal speaking task. The language function here is exchanging information. Remember the suitcase that the students packed for homework? We're going to bring that back in. And I'm going to model this for students. So this is the task with teacher support that Joanne mentioned. And students are going to open their suitcases, do it kind of battleship style, face to face, and ask each other what they have. So for example, a student might say, in my suitcase, I have, go ahead and click, yep, I have pants. The other student might say, I also have pants. And so they will put pants in the column where it says things that they have in common. One student might say, I have a t-shirt. The other student will say, oh, I don't have a t-shirt. And so t-shirt will go into the different column of the T-chart. And then that student might say, well, I have a cap or a hat, and that will go into the different column. That's okay, Bill, go ahead to the next one. This will move on to a presentational speaking task where students will share out what it is that they have in their suitcase. Again, this is all scaffolding for later when they're going to describe the clothing that their guinea pig will be wearing. So I have a t-shirt, but my friend doesn't have a t-shirt. He has pants, right? And so all the students will describe what they have, again, modeling all of the clothing vocabulary and using that I have, he has verb. We then move to the trip. We're going to take this trip. Of course, my students will be leaving from JFK. And so we take off on this journey to Peru to see the Guinea Pig Festival. But while we're in air, on the flight, of course, we'll see a in-flight movie. In this case, it's a movie about the Guinea Pig Festival to help students understand what that is. And so I'm using an authentic video that I have had, I'm using some scaffolds and supports. Go ahead and click, Bill. And this is going to be an interpretive viewing task for students. Using an Edpuzzle structure, students have some questions that are interspersed throughout the video. Again, for those of you who don't know, the Guinea Pig Festival is a festival in Peru and also parts of Ecuador where folks dress up their guinea pigs, and it is a fashion show. And so this video gives a quick overview. There's some interviews with folks who talk about how they dress their guinea pigs, lots of beautiful images and lots of good vocabulary. And the comprehension check that Joanne was talking about is scattered throughout the video using Edpuzzle. Moving on from this, we land in Peru. This is all part of the fantasy trip. And once we're there, I tell the students that they have an invitation. This is going to lead to a presentational speaking task that was scaffolded earlier, where they will be describing their guinea pigs. So they have an invitation. They are asked to dress their guinea pig, and they have 15 minutes to dress it up in groups. They will then be asked to describe their guinea pig to the judges, to the rest of the class. And the whole class, of course, will vote on their favorite, who is going to win. So what this looks like, students will have a quick black and white outline master where they get to draw with colored pencils very quickly, but in a group. So they have to discuss what clothing the guinea pig will wear. They dress their guinea pigs. Of course, they have to describe all the articles of clothing as in a fashion show out to the class. Who do you think is going to win? Of course, it's this beautiful guinea pig with the lovely skirt and hat and beautiful necklace who wins first prize. They all vote and decide on a winner. So that's the run of this around 55-minute class. What comes after might take the discussion into a different direction. And so what I want students to do for homework is to fill out a Venn diagram where they get involved in some cultural comparisons. They're going to compare dressing up of the guinea pig in this festival to how we dress up our animals, our pets, in the United States, in New York, or in their home cultures. So they're going to do that for homework and make those comparisons. And then later, last step, this might lead into a deeper discussion about the ethics of dressing up animals. And there are lots of wonderful infographics and videos and resources that they can access, and they will have good conversations around whether or not dressing up animals is a good thing or a bad thing or a non-issue, but they certainly have opinions about it, as I can tell you. And so that's the overview of my Guinea Pig Festival lesson for novice learners. I'm going to turn it over to Bill Heller, who will talk to you about a checkpoint C example.
Thanks, Lori. We have about 5 minutes, so I'm going to call an audible here. I'm going to just going to briefly describe the unit. It's or the lesson. It's on a gallery walk of different artists. The complete lesson plan is found in a PDF file in your folder, so you can go through it there. But the lesson is basically takes you through an interpersonal lesson at the checkpoint C level, where students will be able to express their opinions. And you'll be able to see the activities I did prior, the list of works that I used, some of the scaffolds and supports that were included. And the beginning of the lesson was a very simple game to activate vocabulary. During the lesson, we had the gallery walk, which is basically an interpretive task where they're interpreting authentic images. But then the key to the lesson, the centerpiece of the lesson, that the objective is centered on, is to have the students express their opinions about the works from different eras that they examined. And they engage in a gallery walk, and then they answer question cards about opinions in pairs. And then the teacher is evaluating this at the end of the lesson with a formative assessment on a Padlet, where all the students answer, what did you learn about your tastes in paintings? And then they can respond to one another's opinions. And then follow up will be different focus on other artworks as communicating as social commentary. So to conclude, what's new in this template? You may have seen that, as Joanne mentioned earlier, a good lesson plan will guide your thinking as you develop a lesson that's aligned with your targeted unit goals. It provides a dress rehearsal and promotes alignment of tasks with your objectives. So I imagine that this lesson plan template may also resemble the lesson plan outline that you may be currently using. It's designed to be flexible enough to accommodate a variety of current approaches to lesson planning. However, it's important to point out that in designing this lesson template for world language teachers, one goal was to make the template as streamlined as possible to focus on the most essential elements that are necessary in a successful, standards-based, proficiency-oriented lesson. So it's important to remember that the template is designed to show the direct relationship between the unit plan template and each lesson, as Joanne so clearly pointed out. And the template facilitates alignment of the proficiency target, the standards, the language functions, the can-do statements, the learning experiences, and the assessments. So reviewing our goals today, I can identify how the world language lesson planning is guided by the elements of the unit plan. I can identify contents of the New York State world language unit lesson plan template. I can identify guiding principles, strategies, scaffolds that support student learning, and I can analyze lesson plans at 3 proficiency checkpoints for how they prepare learners to carry out the revised New York State world language standards. At this point, we might have time for 1 or 2 questions. Actually, what we'll probably do, I think, let's let Candy sign us off. And if you, it is approaching 5 o'clock, so you can sign out and you'll have your CTLE credits. If you'd like to hang on and do some question and answer, we'll stay here and answer some questions.
Thanks, Bill. So I want to thank Joanne, Bill, and Lori for another wonderful workshop, and thank you to all the staff who helped facilitate this event. A reminder that all attendees will receive either a certificate of attendance or a CTLE certificate within 24 hours. You'll also get a workshop badge. When you get your badge, consider adding it to your email signature or posting it to social media to spread the word about world language professional learning. The recording of this workshop and the accompanying post assessments will be made available on the OBEWL website about a week from today. The registration forms for the May standards-based curriculum planning workshop is available, as Joanne mentioned, on our website. Please consider bookmarking this page so that you can keep up to date with the new offerings. Finally, we'd like to make you aware of an opportunity this summer to attend collaborative unit design workshops. 2 non-consecutive days have been designated in each region from 9 to 2 p.m. Teachers can come to 1 or both days to work with fellow language teachers to design unit plans aligned to the revised standards. To register, go to our professional learning page and look for Summer Collaborative Unit Design. It's also available under the Standards and Guidelines website under Resources for Teachers Unit Design. Workshops are offered free of charge and attendees can earn 4 hours of CTLE credit for each day. Thank you for attending and have a wonderful weekend.